Welcome back. Right, let's continue with our conversation with Advocate Gcaleka. She is, of course, the acting public protector. She's still with us here in studio. Thank you so much for your patience as we went to that break. Just tell me about the morale at the Public Protector's office with all these things that have been happening recently. I mean, you've been there 2 years, yes, you said, but I mean, the fact that you joined, knowing that there's all these court cases that found that the Public Protector's Office erred in legal matters when it's led by an advocate, you know, that for me would be embarrassing. But you joined, so I'm sure you thought that you could make a difference in the office. But tell me about the morale with all the news that surround the Public Protector's Office recently.
The morale is actually high.
Really?
It's high. I mean, if you go into social media, you'll see all the photos. They've had Heritage Day and all of that. But that's besides the point. What's critical is that we've ensured that we bring together the team. And I bring them into confidence on the events of what is happening, the senior management and the executives. I have staff meetings. I've been visiting the provinces to give assurance to the team that they still have support, the work is going on. But you know, what's been encouraging is that they have demonstrated that the public protector is not an individual, it's an institution. Yeah. And it's an institution that is structured, that has systems, that has policies, and they are working in line with that, and they are not placing much weight on this. In fact, the current news are motivating them to work more because they are saying, I mean, it's their work, it's work that they produce. They need to ensure that they work harder to improve the integrity of that work, to improve the quality of that work, so that they too can be seen with a different eye, because they are members of communities and society and family, and everybody wants to know what is happening in the Office of the Public Protector because they work there. But most importantly, we've got staff members who've been there since the establishment of the office, so they've worked with different public protectors, and as you know, every 7 years the term expires and a new public protector starts. But of course, this is an unprecedented event that is happening around the Office of the Public Protector. So it does require more support than before, which we have put in place. We ensure that there's more activities that encourage them. But we've also intensified our employee wellness programs so that we are affected more. As you are aware, some of our staff members have also testified before the committee in Parliament, and it's obviously affecting them. It can't be easy that they have to testify, you know, in such a proceeding where their boss is involved. But the support mechanisms that we've put in place have really assisted them, and the morale is quite high.
Okay, that's good, because I was going to bring that up. You know, never have we had a public protector suspended and her own colleagues or subordinates having been summoned to, you know, talk about some of the events that they thought were not so correct. But last week you released a couple of reports, of course, one of them having to do with the Department of Defense, particularly when it came to COVID-19 procurement there. You know, what exactly did the Public Protector's Office find, at least when it comes to some of the things that we wonder happened during the time of COVID? Obviously, things were being procured quite quickly. So there were definitely going to be those elements of corruption that creep in, right? So what exactly did the Public Protector find when it came to the DOD specifically?
In respect of this matter, this is a matter that was procured according to the DOD in line with a bilateral agreement that they have with Cuba, you know. Now, what we found in this respect is that, firstly, this bilateral agreement was not binding because it clearly states that whatever action or conduct is done in terms of the agreement must be done in line with the domestic laws and prescripts. And in this case, it should have been in line with our procurement prescripts, you know, legal prescripts. As well as, this is the interferon, it was not registered in South Africa, therefore unauthorized. And at the time of them bringing it into the country, SAPRA had not given any authorization thereof. So those are the two issues that we found that did not go according to the law in respect of the procurement of this drug.
And your, you know, your recommendations there, I know that you can't go after the former minister you know, she's no longer in that office, but also she would say that she doesn't necessarily get involved in the procurement. Well, she's not supposed to. We all know ministers are not really supposed to, because that's what you have a CFO for in a department, etc. But what were your recommendations in terms of money that might have been lost, you know, to South Africa during that time because of that procurement?
Yes, the minister wasn't involved. It's, the Secretary of Defence is the accounting officer, but you also have the Chief of Defence. It's quite a complex situation in the DOD on how these things are done, and then you've got the different units with their heads who've got authority in that respect.
I think that's why,
you know,
the queue is too long.
Yeah, the queue is too long, and the authority is much hard because it's a command and control environment. But the remedial action that we've made really is to ensure that the Secretary of Defence exercises her powers and not just look to the Chief of Defence and say, okay, my powers are this. So we've spelled it out that she's got powers in terms of the PFMA as the accounting authority of the department, and therefore there are certain prescripts that she needs to enforce. But also the Chief of Defence has got a responsibility that he also adheres to the PFMA, but also takes lawful instructions in line with the legal prescripts from the Secretary of Defence.
All right, coming to that Zimbabwe trip, the airplane lift when it came to the former Minister of Defence. Of course, you do say in your report that, you know, your remedial action don't really have anything to do with her specifically, because the President had dealt with it. Yes. He docked her salary for 3 months, and later on he changed her. Well, he removed her from that particular office and put her more in Parliament. But what do we do then what in your recommendations do you say government needs to do to avoid this from happening? Because clearly the minister defended it so much that she thought that there was nothing wrong she did.
What we've taken as remedial action is that the President must issue an instruction of adherence to applicable policies and the law, because the department through the Defence Act and the ministers as executive authorities through the ministerial handbook and the code of ethics, they do have governing policies. So the issue that we found there, it was non-adherence, because the minister also raised that, look, she was not the first person, it has become a norm.
Exactly.
You know? The fact that it's a norm, it doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's supported by the law. So that's basically the remedial action that we've taken in that respect.
Yeah, I think that was more of my concern when I read the report, because I thought then that means that all those ministers that we have in cabinet didn't even know that they're not protected from this law, you know, and there might be many other trips that we have no idea about in South Africa that happened prior to this one blowing up. But just lastly, a public protector, you know, I must admit there was a lot of discussion around the investigation that the public protector was asked to actually do. I think it was earlier this year by Mr. Dirks, an NEC member in the ANC and a parliament, you know, a member, who complained about that tape. That was quite controversial as well, that tape doing the rounds with the President seemingly admitting to public funds being used by the ANC in a way that they shouldn't. But you, of course, in your report come back and you say he did not violate the Executive Ethics Code. Help us understand. Because that was clearly his voice. So for a simple South African, it would be like, but he basically admitted to this.
He said it.
Yeah, he said it.
Yeah. Look, an investigation, it's about looking beyond the surface. You need to put things into context by the evidence that would be presented by both sides, what the complainant is saying, the respondent's version, but also seek independent information outside of the two parties. We normally say ours is to find the real truth between the two truths that come forward. And the real truth that we found is that prior to that meeting, the NEC meeting and the President's utterances, I mean, this is what you call common notoriety, because it's information that has been in the public domain Firstly, newspaper articles have been reporting about it. If you recall, the president had set up that interministerial high-level panel that investigated the misappropriation of funds within the State Security Agency.
Yeah.
And further to that, the testimony in the Zondo Commission that came out in 2020 that spoke to the misappropriation of funds and the involvement of the ANC cadres in that respect. So, and in the response that the president provided to us and the NEC minutes which we had requested and they were provided to us actually proved that it was not like it's personal information directly at his disposal, which is not in the public domain, because all angles show that this information has been in the public domain. And I mean, the couple of sources, and some of which I've mentioned, have proven that. So it is on that basis that we felt that he did not contravene the executive code. But further to that, I mean, the president has done something in respect of this thing, the high-level panel, but also strengthening the arm of the National Prosecuting Authority by the establishment of the ID, which happened under his leadership and was proclaimed by him to ensure that perpetrators of corruption and crime, you know, involving misappropriation of funds in the state are being dealt with. So it was on those bases really that we find that the allegations against him are not substantiated. But we acknowledge that he does have a constitutional duty as the president of the country, as the first citizen, as the one who's entrusted with the governance of the country, to actually take action where he is aware of information such as this.
Yeah, especially because yes, he's president now, but he was also deputy president for at least a term and 2 terms, or a term and a half of his predecessor. You know, so it seemed to South Africans that there were things that the president knew, even during his tenure as deputy president, that he kept quiet about. And now he wore his hat as ANC president and took off his hat as the country's president to warn his comrades that, you know, we all know what we do here. But let's make sure that it stays under wraps. Do you understand what it looked like to South Africans?
No, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, that's why we approach this investigation with such due diligence, because he does have a legal responsibility, and it was to see whether he has properly discharged that responsibility.
Why did this investigation take such a short time to conclude?
What is such a short time? I mean, well, it's about...
I think the complaint came to you around...
January. So it's now about nine months.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's how long?
That's how long, yes.
And when it comes to the Phala Phala issue, I know South Africans and politicians are quite obsessed about it because we're trying to understand it. Has he been summoned to come and tell you what's happening in the Public Protector's Office more than once?
As you're aware, we did send the president questions initially, and then he responded.
Asked for more time.
Yeah, he asked for an extension, and thereafter he responded. So we were satisfied with his response. We did again write to him because we then received more complaints, you know, so we wanted to give him a fair opportunity. It was similar. It was the same complaints, but it's only fair that we brought those to his attention, and he indicated that no, he was still satisfied with the answers that he had given previously. So that's how far it is.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in to speak to us. There's obviously quite a lot that we can speak to you about, finding that the Public Enterprises Minister, for instance, did not also go against his executive ethics code when he employed someone in one of his entities, etc. Sure, there's a lot. You've got a mammoth task ahead of you to prove to South Africans once more that this office is for them and no one else.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, even in that matter, we looked straight into the legal prescripts. What were his action? What does the Public Service Act and regulations say? And we found that the Public Service Regulation actually makes provision for a deviation, you know, under the circumstances, and that he had followed what was required in terms of that, and he was granted a deviation by the Minister of Public Service and Administration based on the requirements of the Public Service Regulations.
Just a funny question very quickly. Do you have like files and files of complaints about ESCOM? That is the bane of our existence right now.
We do have a matter on ESCOM that
Yeah.
we are dealing with, yes.
Is it just one matter? I'm quite surprised because, you know, a lot of South Africa, we are not getting our constitutional right to electricity and power, etc. So I was very interested to find out if you've gotten more than one complaint, just as a funny tail ender.
No.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. That is the Acting Public Protector, Kholeka Gcaleka, speaking to us about a myriad of issues having to do with the office that she now leads. Of course, like I said a little bit earlier, she's got a mammoth task ahead of her in terms of, you know, what she'll do with investigations that come out during her tenure as she continues to act. And of course, whether or not when her colleague, the suspended public protector, Busisiwe Mkhwebane, comes to office, how will the relationship between the two of them be? She says it'll be just fine. Right,